TvGrace presents the inexpressible words of God, the gospel of grace, on the lips of Jesus Christ man. Abba Father.
This ministry began on September 6 of 1986. That is, it was appropriately incorporated under the earthly laws. But it was revealed to me much earlier when I was in the state of Massachusetts. And today we will take a brief look at what this ministry is all about. And if you are just visiting or have been here for a short time, you will understand terminology that is not often spoken by the religions. For example, the Bible records that there are two gospels. One is called the circumcision and the other the uncircumcision. One is of flesh and one is of spirit. And to know them better, let's see what circumcision is according to the Bible. Let's look at Genesis. Genesis chapter 17. To understand the term circumcision, because there are people who come and say, what is that? They don't understand what we're talking about. Genesis, first book of the Bible. If you see a visitor and you can lend him your Bible, chapter 17. Let's look at verse 10 to get a clear idea. Let's go step by step. This is not difficult. You will understand it. If you read it, it says Genesis 17 verse 10. Read it, it says, "This is my covenant." God speaks and says, "This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh. Say the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be for a sign of the covenant between me and you. And when he is 8 days old, every male shall be circumcised." That is why Mary, when Jesus was born, on the 8th day took the little child Jesus to the temple to be circumcised, because he had not yet died. The first covenant was in place. After the cross, this covenant ends. After the cross, but before the cross, this was the covenant. Therefore, since Jesus was born a Jew, Mary had to take him immediately on the 8th day in order for Jesus to be blessed, that is, included in the covenant. Otherwise, Mary failed, and Jesus could not have died for us, because then they would have found him in wickedness. Look what it says about this covenant. It says, I will repeat, "He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations. He who is born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendant. He who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money must be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant." Everlasting. Why? Because it was going to end at the cross. If he had said by eternal covenant, then there was no room for another covenant. But perpetual means for a time. So it says by perpetual covenant. Sometimes perpetual means 100 years, right? 200 years, 300, a life sentence is that. Have you heard about that? It says for an everlasting covenant, and the uncircumcised male child who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. In other words, if Mary had not taken Jesus to the temple to circumcise him on the 8th day, then Jesus would not have served. We were in our sins. So that is called circumcision. Now, understanding that, let's go to Galatians 2:7 to see the two gospels. If you come to understand this little half-hour class today, you will come away enriched. Galatians chapter 2 verse 7. Someone who criticizes us in Puerto Rico, especially me, says, you know what the problem with that ministry is? They prove everything with the Bible. Hey, and that is not a problem. That must be a relief for you and me, isn't it? Oh, and another problem they have is that they multiply like ants. We are in many nations. Why do we multiply? Because people are searching for the truth. You want the truth. You don't want to be deceived anymore. Galatians chapter 2 verse 7. Look carefully at what we are going to read now, because it depends on this, whether you prefer to be with us or not to come anymore. And I prefer that you keep on coming. Verse 7 says, but on the contrary, when they saw that the gospel for the uncircumcised had been committed to me, it is no longer circumcision, now it is the opposite, uncircumcision. It says, as the gospel for the circumcised was to Peter. As to Peter, the gospel of what? Peter was the leader of a group of disciples, right? The gospel that was given to Peter was the first one, the one that God had spoken in the Old Testament. Now Paul, since Paul entered after the cross, was given the one of the uncircumcision. Do you understand me? Yes? In other words, there are two gospels. Hey, the little problem that took place 2,000 years ago when Christ died and rose from the dead, the first one, that of circumcision, came to an end. But what happens, since Peter was the first pope, Paul was killed in Rome and Peter continued preaching the one who had finished. Do you understand me? Pay attention to this. I am not lying to you, nor am I adding or twisting a biblical verse. Simply that Peter was faithful to what he lived with Jesus of Nazareth. And as they killed Paul, either out of wickedness or out of ignorance. But Peter continued to proclaim a gospel that was perpetual, that had ended at the cross. And then the world was deceived until 1986, until the other days. So, hey, I didn't know anything about that. What I'm telling you now, nobody knew about it. I didn't know it. For me, since this is the Bible, I preached everything that was in there. But then, one day when I was in the state of Massachusetts, I was very restless. I spent the day super restless. I had a kind of restlessness. It wasn't restlessness, it was an expectation. I was not disturbed. What I really felt was that something very good was going to happen to me. Has that ever happened to you? Sometimes you say, I feel that something is going to happen to me. Well, that night when I went to bed, they took me to a place that I knew was not the earth, that it was not something normal. And then when they took me to that place, I found that at that moment a character came up to me. And he sat me down. He said, sit down, and he opened my Bible and said, read. And then that day, it was revealed to me that the gospel of circumcision had expired 2,000 years ago. And that now I had to preach the gospel of the uncircumcision. And I unknowingly began to preach it. I did not know what I was doing to the world and to other religious groups, because let me say this. Listen, what I'm giving you is something very important. No church in the world preaches uncircumcision. I mean, all the buildings and temples that you see out there, churches with good intentions, very good people. In fact, those people are better than us. They behave better than us. They even sacrifice their lives. Women don't wear jewelry, don't go to the movies, don't party. Today, do you know what they do? They are praying. And we're supposed to be partying right now. Hey, we are bad and they are good. The problem is that this is not a question of bad guys or good guys. It's a matter of being in the truth. So what happens? I start preaching on circumcision, and I was working for an organization, the largest in the world, the Southern Baptists. My office was in Atlanta. I was leading evangelism in Puerto Rico, and my calling was to evangelize all of Puerto Rico. I had $1 million budget to go to all the parks and reach out to the people with the circumcision. And then I preached that, but when what I told you a while ago happened to me, then I began to preach uncircumcision. Not the gospel given to Peter, but the gospel given to Paul. Say, to Paul. And then I began to have conflicts, because those two gospels, one represents the flesh of your foreskin, while the other, spirit. And so I didn't realize the conflicts that were being generated. Every time I went to the Atlanta office, when I spoke up, I immediately caused discomfort. You cause discomfort when you speak about what you learn here. And you notice that you give people anger. Have you noticed that they can't speak like you or me? Well, look, this is like that. It's not like that. It kind of makes them angry. Because uncircumcision is for the spirit. Circumcision is for the flesh. And he who serves that gospel gives it wrath. For the law produces wrath, said the Apostle Paul. Well, then I felt at the crossroads because no one understood me. I had difficulties with my boss. I had difficulties with the whole office. And I had difficulties even with my family, with my people, with those close to me and those closer to me and with those less close to me. And I said, hey, what's wrong with me? They see me so ugly. They see me so bad. They see me so... And I was not doing anything bad. What I was doing was preaching the gospel that corresponds now, the uncircumcision. Until it was time to understand that these two do not mix. Look at what it says in Galatians, so you can see that they are like water and oil. Look at Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5. Look what it says about circumcision. Verse 1. Let's start with verse 1, okay? It says, stand fast therefore in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us what? He hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of what? Of what? And what is the yoke of bondage? The next verse. See, it says, behold, I, Paul, to whom the uncircumcision was given. I say unto you that if ye be circumcised, what does it says? What happened? Wait for it. If you serve the gospel of circumcision, what happens to Christ? Christ is of no use to you. That's why I was having difficulty with my boss, because Christ is of no use to him. But to me, it does. Look. Here I cannot apply to a radio program, because if they see that it is for me, they say no. But if I were a spiritualist or a witch doctor, they can apply. To the Protestant pastor, they say, oh, to you, yes. But if I apply, they say, don't give it to them. Why? Because to all these Christians, Christ is of no use at all. In other words, look how it goes on to say the verse, so you can see that it all goes along the same lines. It says, again, I testify to every man who gets himself circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law of Christ. What? You who attempt to be justified by law, you have fallen from what? And if you are fallen from grace, what good is Christ to you? That is why you went to the Catholic Church and Christ was of no use to you. Don't you see that the Catholic Church is a picture of circumcision and law? That is why they keep the 10 Commandments. A Mass is a picture of that. It's the whole symbol of the Catholic Church. And I'm not saying that's wrong. That was fine before the cross. Now after the cross, after Christ died, it is useless. Do you understand me? Hey, how painful to talk like that, the enemies I make for myself. You invite a Catholic in here and he immediately gets confused. Hey, what does he have to be talking against Catholics? I am not speaking against Catholics. I am dividing, tracing, judging a situation for you to understand. But anyone who speaks the truth today is going to get in trouble. Do you know why? Because you will know the truth and the truth sets you free. And you don't want to be free? The problem is that you have thought that you have been so good and that religion is so good for all these years, and when you hear a thing like this you say, no, 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 that is impossible. Now when you go to the Catholic Bible, which is the same version that I have here, but if the Catholic Bible says we are incorrect, it means that the Bible is the worst enemy of the Catholic Church. Now if you read a novena, you read the Mass, you hear letters from the Pope and so on, that is not going to tell you, but if you read their Bible, you will see that that is where the problem lies. What a problem, huh? So that is the problem that this ministry has worldwide. And if you join because you love the truth, you're going to be asking for trouble. I warn you not to stay. Unless you love the truth and say, Apostle, I don't mind staying, I want the truth. Unless you want to continue in circumcision. Or you can continue by another path, mixing. And say, well, in order not to receive persecution, I take a little bit of circumcision and uncircumcision. The problem is right there. Look what it says. Look, the verse. Nine. Yes, verse 9 says, a little leaven. What does verse 9 say? It works through the whole batch of dough. In other words, you take a barrel of apples and you put 100 apples in it. And a damaged apple has the ability to damage the 99. Now the 99 cannot repair the damaged one. What a problem, huh? I'm not lying. I swear to you on my mother, I'm not lying. I am quite sure, but I am quite sure that I am telling the truth. Oh, and another thing, I am quite sure that they cannot prove me wrong, because so far they have not been able to. I was in Pereira, Colombia, and was approached by a priest and a nun. Because there are honest people in the Catholic Church, people who seek the truth, and he was a Franciscan priest who studies the Bible. And then he came to me dressed naturally in civilian clothes, hidden, and said, hey, who explained that to you? Look, I've turned this over and I hadn't seen that. Then he told me who he was, and I told him, well, I congratulate him. And he said to me, and I'm going to introduce you to the nun too. I'm just finishing with the parish, he told me. I'll have the same thing happen to me as you. They'll take me out of here. I told him, no, even if they take you out, the important thing is that they find you in the truth. Do you prefer to be right with men or right with God? Because if you are right with God, the angels serve you. Yeah. So that's the job. What a job of getting people out of the gospel of Peter to get them into Paul's gospel. That is why he says, Paul, he identifies himself. Paul, tell you that if you do what Peter says, Christ will not help you in anything. Was Peter bad? Not bad, very bad. Because of the visits, look at what chapter 2 says about Peter. See why Paul spoke this way about Peter. Look at verse 11, chapter 2, verse 11. You know, this has always been in the Bible, but I couldn't see it until that day. And I was a Bible student, I read for myself, but that was hidden. Look at what verse 11 says. But when Peter, who? When Peter came to Antioch, what did Paul do to him? Because Peter was to what? Peter was to condemn. For sure, because you detach yourself from the blessings of Christ. They give you a rosary, they put the rosary on you, you count all the beads of the rosary, but you are cut off from Christ. It does not help you at all. Because God is a God of covenants. Notice that in the Old Covenant it says, and the uncircumcised male child who is not circumcised shall be cut off from his people. He is to be stoned, he is to be cast out, he is useless. Because God is a God of covenants. You have to be in the covenant where God is. God is not there, God is here. And if you have been there, you have to get out of there. Because God moves. So you have to be behind God. It is like in the Old Testament, when the cloud moved, and when the cloud moved, the people had to follow the cloud. Well, God moved after the cross. After the cross, another covenant took place. And in that, religion has lied to the whole world. Not out of malice, but what happens is that he is a blind man who says to another blind man, come on, I'll take you. I don't know if you remember the anecdote of the blind man on Fifth Avenue in New York City. He was with the cane like this, and he heard the cars but did not see them. And he moved the cane looking for someone to help him cross Fifth Avenue. Because imagine, it has so many lanes. And then what happened? Well, suddenly someone came and touched him. And fantastic, he walked, and when they walked, a car came and ran over both of them. Because the one who touched him was another blind man looking for help. And look, the town is full of blind people. The blind reverend, the blind bishop, the blind monsignor, the blind pope, the blind father, the blind nun. And I'm not saying that they are bad. On the contrary, they are good people. Have you seen how they want to serve God? They love the Lord. Do you know why I know that they love the Lord? Because I was blind there too. I was in the circumcision. Let's stand. Tell the person next to you, I prefer the truth. And I stand in the true gospel, the uncircumcision, blessed with every blessing. Greet your brother and declare him blessed.